You're on mute, Daniel. Okay, we're continuing principles of philosophy, slow reading, page 100. I can go ahead and start, and then we could go Daniel, and then Sandra, and then me. When beings fit together, we also say they harmonize. Harmony is an accord or congruity of parts, which, by virtue of their being in accordance with each other, form a consistent whole. In an ontological context, the harmonic whole is more original than the parts, in that it provides to expectant beings the consistency of their being, which in turn consists in holding the wholesomeness of the whole. The word harmony comes from the Greek harmonia, which means precisely this: an accordance, a measured conjunction or joining of things gathered into a whole. In fact, the Greek word harmos means joint or gap. In the present context, it indicates what joins together two things without being itself a thing. A jointing is a measured or moderate when it respects the right measure, namely the measure in which the logos is held. This implies that by virtue of the harmonic relation to each of the jointed beings, it assigns a sufficient or fair space of time for it to be there as itself in its fairness. Hence, beings are joined together, but at the same time placed at the right distance from each other, so that there is no confusion between them, and none of them has to subdue the other, i.e., evade its space and time in order to impose its own being. In a harmony, each jointed thing holds its own ground precisely by interpreting in its own unique manner the harmonizing principle of the whole, and thus, just by being itself, respects the ground of all other things.
In a fair jointing, things belong together, i.e., they are gathered, within a whole that the jointing itself grants and constitutes. Wholeness here implies the traits of intactness and integrity, soundness and wholesomeness, which also characterize the gathered beings as such, i.e., in their being. Between the thus gathered beings, there is a harmony, which belongs to none of them, but rather is the whole granting, whole kindling, discontingent fairness itself, which they hold in their being. Again, the circumstance of being fair with regard to all other beings, namely of leaving them the space and time for their own, fair, fitting, measured being, is not the result of goodwill or good intentions, nor can it indeed be calculated or made. Rather, that circumstance is implied by the very fact that each being, in so far as it belongs to the whole constituted as a measured jointing, preserves in its own mode and measure the wholeness and wholesomeness for the being of all other beings.
On the other hand, where this harmonic whole is not granted, and where its wholeness is not preserved in the measure of each thing's being, beings are bound to clash, and to some extent intrude into each other's time and space. even when apparently there is no relation between them. In fact, each thing, as it imposes itself on, i.e., as it wills, its own time and space, takes away the time and space from other beings, thus imposing itself against and on them. Put differently, the disharmonic thing can only appear by prevailing over other beings' attempt to secure the time and space of their own appearing. The disharmonic thing can only appear by prevailing over other beings' attempt to secure the time and space of their own appearing. Or again, it can only enforce its presence by overpowering the forceful pushing into presence of each other being. Thus, rather than being harmoniously gathered into a whole, beings are now interlinked by relations of relative power. The complex of these relations of power defines what, in contrast to a whole, we call a contingent totality.
Harmonia is one of Heraclitus's names for the discontingent principle of beings as such and in whole. It indicates the same as logos, but according to the trait of measured fair joining. That fragment 54, which speaks of harmonia, reads as follows: a harmony that refrains from appearing is more vigorous than one that strives to and attains an appearance. Two kinds of harmony are distinguished. One that itself does not appear, but makes itself known as that which withholds its appearing. And another one that, on the contrary, is all in its conspicuousness. The latter is a mere harmony of beings, whose glamorous appearing catches the eye. The immediate conspicuousness of these beings can convey the impression that their fittingness and congruency is a character that belongs to these beings themselves. In other words, it is tempting to believe that a harmonic whole not only can be obtained by way of a certain disposition of beings, but is nothing but such a visible disposition. Thus, the appearing harmony carries with it the temptation of conceiving of a harmony as a mere relations of beings, that is, of reducing harmony itself to a being. What is the origin of this temptation? Answer: the element that grants any kind of conspicuous harmony, namely the inconspicuous harmony. The latter element, due to its grounding trait, which consists in refraining from appearing in favor of the harmonic appearing of beings, implies that temptation to overlook and forget it, and to content oneself with and stick to beings and their relations when attempting to achieve a harmony. However, a harmony that is placed exclusively at the level of appearing is not even a harmony anymore, but merely a more or less appealing, impacting, congruent arrangement. The attempt to achieve a harmony by way of congruent arrangements is misguided. An example of such an attempt would be to play a piano sonata merely by following previously set ideal time specifications. First movement, 4 minutes, 32 seconds. Second movement, 5 minutes, 43 seconds. and mechanically defined intensities of touch, piano, forte, fortemissio, etc.
The two kinds of harmony are sharply distinguished, and yet, in a sense, they may convert into one another. The one non-appearing harmony is the lightening and the openness for the appearing harmony, in that it is the openness of, i.e., belonging to, the jointing and gathering principle itself. In kindling the appearing harmony, that is, the fairly jointed whole of beings, the non-appearing harmony, in a way, breaks and in this sense converts into this whole of beings, namely, it generates this whole as a gift which, in its appearing, preserves what is other than itself, namely its invisible and inaudible source. On the other hand, when the whole of beings stands in its fair and fulgent congruity, it may suddenly convert itself and simultaneously transport us into the invisible and inaudible dimension that, while it withholds itself from shining and sounding, grants and ever regenerates this whole. The mind of the thinker minds precisely this point of conversion of the one into the whole and of the whole into the one. In regard to this conversion, Heraclitus offers the analogy of the conversion of gold into things and of things into gold. In its mindfulness, thinking knows that the inconspicuous harmony is more constitutive and thus more vigorous than a conspicuous one, in that any well-jointed whole of beings appears from out of, as well as disappears into, the non-appearing harmony.
While the more vigorous harmony refrains from appearing, in the sense that it doesn't shine or become visible, namely sound and become audible, it does, however, somehow show, make itself known, so that it can be minded by men. Thus, this harmony has its own inconspicuous appearing, which is of such a nature that it lets appear all beings in their being and sense, while the latter, in turn, holds, shelters, the non-appearing harmony as the inconspicuous element of the principle itself. Thus, the non-appearing harmony is itself a mindfulness, or rather a mindful openness that breaks as the refraining from appearing that lets beings in whole open out into appearance. The non-appearing harmony is itself a mindfulness, or rather a mindful openness that breaks as the refraining from appearing that lets beings in whole open out into appearance. We must distinguish between this mindfulness and man's mindfulness, just as earlier we distinguished between the logos, capital L, and the logos, small l, of the soul. The mindful openness that, in its breaking, lets beings burst into appearance, we now call flagrancy. This word comes from the Latin verb flagrare, to blaze, in a sense which we know from the expressions in crimine flagranti and in flagrant delict, which are commonly used when someone is caught red-handed while committing an illicit activity. The inconspicuous flashing of flagrancy generates the fair shining of beings that show within, and thanks to this flagrancy. Therefore, we can also translate fragment 53 as follows. An inconspicuous harmony is of a more constitutive flagrancy than a conspicuous one.
The flagrancy of the logos, the openness of the initial gathering, born in a fitting knowledge, is the unimposing harmony for the appearing of things in their fair and measured beings. Poetry and art, too, know this fairness of appearing. And because they know the difference between a made totality and a whole of beings, which is kindled by what is not itself a being, they attempt to save the wholesomeness, the inconspicuous fairness of the whole. At times, they even indicate not only this whole as a flagrant harmonic whole, but actually the kindling, clearing openness, that is, the truth of this whole itself. This showing can be a naming to the mind in harmonies of words, of letting appear to the mindful eye, in harmonies of color, a letting resound to the mindful ear, harmonies of tones, etc. We can sense a poetic naming of the flagrancy of the whole in the first lines of a poem by Emily Dickinson. The world is not conclusion. A species stands beyond, invisible as music, but positive as sound. Or in this other poem by the same poetress, which reminds us that the flagrancy and the principle, which engenders a whole of beings, a world, is itself never a being or a thing. By homely gifts of a kindled words, the human heart is told of nothing. Nothing is the force that renovates the world.
By homely gifts and hindered words, the human heart is told of nothing. Nothing is the force that renovates the world. 4.3 is Kosmos. A word that indicates the same as Harmonia, but according to a different trait, is Kosmos. We know this name from words like cosmology or cosmopolitanism, where it means world, be it in the wide sense of the universe or in the more restricted sense of the dimension of human dwelling on the earth. However, in Heraclitus, Kosmos indicates neither a sphere of beings, the universe, nor a certain sphere of being, like the academic world, the world of sports, etc. But, once again, the element that, by holding back from appearing, lets beings in whole, and thus each single being, appear in their due light. Fragment 30 reads, "This cosmos here, i.e. the one that I'm indicating as different from any visible cosmos, the same for anyone and anything within the whole, none of the gods nor any one of the human beings put it forth or brought it to light, generated, originated it. but it ever was and is and will be. Fire, forever rising, kindling for itself measured whiffs of flagrancies, and then again extinguishing for itself measured whiffs of flagrancies. Kosmos comes from the verb kosmein, which means to order and to rule, to adorn and to embellish, but also to honor and, finally, to allot or assign, namely to a certain order or rule. However, by now we are experienced enough to anticipate that Kosmos cannot be a contingent order, nor an exterior embellishment of what is already given. Rather, Kosmos is the original adornment in the sense of the ungraspable and ungrasping fairness that lets the world and every single being shine in its fitting light, in its intense glamour, in its measured grace, because it, i.e. Kosmos, is itself the invisible lightening that assigns each thing to its fitting time and place, the inconspicuous glamour that allots the whole in its integrity, the unimposing grace that attributes the measure of appearing in which each thing is deployed as such. In what follows, the fragment indicates a number of essential traits of the thus understood cosmos.
The same for anyone and anything within the whole. For the cosmos, the same holds true as for the logos and its knowledge, i.e. the sophon, namely, that it is one and the same for any appearing order and array of beings, and the same for all human gathering and minding. This sameness, however, does not reduce everything to a uniform being, but on the contrary, insofar as it is minded, is the source of the unique and unrepeatable being and notion of things. In other words, the sameness of the discontingent one is the source of the difference of what is equally different. The latter does not mean in the same degree or manner different, but rather different while equal, as to its apartness from the same that puts everything on a par with respect to itself, while releasing it into its scinded uniqueness. In fragment 89, Heraclitus indicates two manners in which the mind can relate to the one and same cosmos. The fragment reads, "To those who are awake belongs one common cosmos, while on the other hand, each one of those who are asleep is turned away into his own cosmos, i.e., the self-contained world of what is merely to him and for him."
None of the gods, nor any one of the human beings put it forth. This is a critical notion. The one cosmos is not a product of man, nor a creation of the gods. The reason for this is that whoever, be it a god or a man, might be said to be the origin of the cosmos, would have to have been there before the cosmos in order to perform that act of creation. But how can anyone be there if there is no there, i.e., no flagrancy or openness for the being of beings in the first place? How can anyone put forth bring to light, generate the cosmos in the same way in which one puts forth, say, a table or a plan. When the cosmos itself is there, the flagrancy, the openness in which anything could appear or disappear as such. Not only must man in his being acknowledge the cosmos, the gods too need the cosmos in order for them to appear, namely, as those who are, in a sense, instrumental to its becoming known to man. On the other hand, men and gods do not merely appear within the cosmos, as if the latter were a mere container. In fact, the relation between the being of men and of gods belongs to the very binding of the cosmos as such. In other words, the cosmos is the ever-coming spaciousness for the likely encounter of men and gods. However, the way in which man belongs to the cosmos is different from that in which a god is involved in it. In fact, the latter is the flashing of the knowledge of the cosmos's vigor, in which that flashing, the former is a flagrantly showing as the bearer of the cosmos's groundless openness. While a god cannot feel the weight of that openness's need for a grounding, man cannot have the lightness, the cosmic knowledge when it is born.
But it ever was and is and will be. In reading this, we are tempted to jump to the conclusion that Heraclitus is presenting the cosmos as some eternal entity or principle. Just what does eternal mean? According to the common notion, eternal means everlasting, and the latter, in turn, means either of the same duration as time itself, or above and outside of time, namely as time's origin. In both cases, time is taken as the flux in which a punctual not yet passes through a punctual now, only to vanish at once into a punctual not anymore. According to this notion of time, if something was ever, is ever, and ever will be, it either is present along this entire flow, that is, in each of its fleeting instants, or it is unaffected by this flow. What is there to say about this level of explanation of Heraclitus's words? Well, it sounds correct and corresponds to that which we commonly think and already know. It restrains us to a sphere where nothing of what has been said so far concerning Logos, Harmonia, and Kosmos is still perceivable.
What legitimates our mechanical application of the common notion of time to Heraclitus' saying? What if, on the other hand, this fragment indicates the experience of a more original time, the time of the principle itself, with regard to which that common notion of time, which, as mentioned before, reflects an operative concept derived from the ontological determination of time that Aristotle attempts in his Physics, is insufficient and misleading. What if the common notion of time was a notion that imposes itself in the regime of contingency? In other words, what if that notion of time was merely the time, namely an operative parameter of contingency? While here we do not have the space to elucidate the notion of time given voice in this Heraclitian fragment, we can nevertheless put forth the following succinct indication. In Heraclitus, time, or the aeon, cf. fragment 52, is close to being thought of as the principle itself in the form of the unitary interplay of ever was and ever will be and ever is. So that the flashing of the cosmos in its inextinguishable regeneration is the unceasingly coming advent, ever will be, of the already become instant, ever was, of clearing and freeness, ever is, which in its impregnable discontinuity impends on man as the nearness itself for his world, which, that nearness, ever waits for his mindful bearing response. In a formula, time is the nearness of the coming of the become instant.
Fire forever rising. The cosmos is now called fire. Our word, pyromantics. Does this mean that Heraclitus is imagining fire, one of the so-called four primitive elements, fire, water, air, ether, as the driving force that lives in and gives life to all that is? It doesn't indeed take some amount of fantasy to believe that a little flame lives in anything that moves. Since, however, Heraclitus is not a fantasist, but a thinker, we must assume that he is not electing a contingent element as a basis and universal explanatory key for the totality of what is contingent. Hence we ask, what trait of sense does the being of fire imply? Among others, the following: inflaming and extinguishing, blazing and lapsing, clearing and blurring, lighting and obscuring, showing and concealing, kindling and effacing, tempering and burning to ashes, stir up the stifling, nourishing and consuming, purifying and putrefying, unleashing and mitigating, enlivening and dispiriting, arousing and calming, impassionating and cooling, enthusing and disillusioning, giving sight and binding. As we can see, these are constitutive traits of rising into, binding in, and sinking away from appearing. However, and this is ever again a decisive point of which to be aware, these traits are what they are, not by themselves, but in reference to a unitary source in its relation to man's being. Thus fire is not as a material element, but in its truth, the ubiquitous principle of appearing and disappearing, of showing and concealing, which as such is in man, and which man is in by virtue of the fundamental trait of his being, namely psyche, and its constituent, i.e. logos. As this principle, fire is forever rising, which means rising into the open as the absconding element which keeps within itself the source of all arising and founding a way of beings, and which indeed is that very source. In fact, fire is this source insofar as no contingency can ever touch or affect it, as it withholds itself in its own discontingent, illocal place. Fire means ever glowing, erupting, absconding, conception of discontingency.
Kindling for itself, measured widths, extinguishing for itself, measured widths. This phrase tells us how Kosmos, the forever rising fire, holds sway, namely, each time as a certain measured width. A measured width is the moderation of flagrancy itself, i.e. of the fire of pure discontingency, into a measured openness or space of time for beings in whole. In other words, it is a determined truth that constitutes a whole of beings by providing a certain mode and domain for their appearing. However, while the kindling of such moderated, mitigated flagrancies is the favor for the arising of beings in whole, the cosmos does not kindle these moderated flagrancies for beings. That is, in response to or in compliance with a need of given beings, but rather for itself, namely for its own holding sway. This means cosmos, the principle as the kindling and extinguishing of the measured widths, needs these widths in order for itself to hold sway, as it cannot hold sway if not in these widths as the principle that grants and denies them. These widths are therefore each time a truth for, i.e. in favor of, beings, but as such they are widths of the principle itself. In other words, both cosmos and the measured widths in which the cosmic principle allots itself keep themselves scinded from beings in whole as pure discontingency. Indeed, only in this manner can they hold sway as the principle and truth for beings in whole, i.e., thinking back to Emily Dickinson's poem, as the species that concludes, i.e., provides the wholesome flagrancy for the world. The cosmos and the flagrancies it kindles and extinguishes for itself, thus letting worlds arise and collapse, keep themselves scinded from beings as the discontingent space of time for their appearing and disappearing, according to the cosmos's own mode and measure. Shall we continue or stop here? I would stop, right?
Yeah.
Stop. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we would stop.
Yeah.
I can't take any poems.
I need some discontingency now.
Let's see.
I would use the second poem of Emily Dickinson.
Just gonna say that.
Yeah?
Yeah. The second poem of Emily Dickinson. You good with that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Sweet. Okay, now chanting.
I like the first one too, but we'll go with the second one.
They're both good. They're both good.
Yeah.
By homely gifts of hindered words, the human heart is told of nothing. Nothing is the force that renovates the world.
By homely gifts and hindered words, the human heart is told of nothing. Nothing is the force that renovates the world.
By homely gifts and hindered words, the human heart is told of nothing. Nothing is the force that renovates the world.
By homely gifts and hindered words, the human heart is told of nothing. Nothing is the force that renovates the world.
By homely gifts and hindered words, the human heart is told of nothing. Nothing, quote unquote, is the force that renovates the world.
By homely gifts and hindered words, the human heart is told of nothing. Nothing is the force that renovates the world.
By homely gifts and hindered words, the human heart is told nothing. Nothing is the force that renovates the world.
By homely gifts and hindered words, the human heart is told of nothing. Nothing is the force that renovates the world.
By homely gifts and hindered words, the human heart is told of nothing. Nothing is the force that renovates the world.
Homely gifts and hindered words, the human heart is told of nothing. Nothing is the force that renovates the world.
By homely gifts and hindered words, the human heart is told of nothing. Nothing is the force that renovates the world.
By homely gifts and hindered words, the human heart is told of nothing. Nothing is the force that renovates the world.
By homely gifts and hindered words, the human heart is told of nothing. Nothing is the force that renovates the world.
By homely gifts and hindered words, The human heart is told of nothing. Nothing is the force that renovates the world.
By homely gifts and hindered words, the human heart is told of nothing. Nothing is the force that renovates the world.
All right. Short speech. The withdrawing element shines forth.
I feel how my being becomes porous, or I feel the porousness at the heart of my being. Porousness that intertwines with nothing.
Only by my caring can I open up the space for appearance. Of the origin.
Look as I may, I am already gone in my looking.
Every breath seems to bring me closer to the nearness of nothingness.
How can I hinder the word if I do not open to it?
This one is not sourced from it. Nothing. It shines forth of it.
If this species that we are would just learn to look a little bit deeper, a little bit closer, the renovation of the world could begin.
I honor all the homely gifts of life.
Attuning to the renovated aspect, the renovating aspect. One's way may be found.
Nothing renovates the world, but also heals the human heart.
Only the human heart can understand nothing.
Only the human heart can see the renovating.
what or who is this being that is speaking right now?
I open the ears of the heart and swim in the silence.
And a third layer of where we can respond to the other speech. The heart, the heart doesn't see its own beat. It sees with it somehow. And it's with it. Accords with this renovating showing of the world.
The poem of Emily Dickinson somehow symbolically joins and tunes my heart to the inaudible tune of nothingness.
How can silence speak itself but through the heart?
Lloyd Dickinson is urging us to hear with the deeper ear what can't be heard. But in its moment of unhearing is a living renovation.
Mm.
Are we not salving right now by surrendering our own selves to nothing?
I'm feeling myself occupying the space of of um, of being non-being, being non-being, being non-being, being non-being in the uh, in the something. I can't describe it. There are no boundaries.
I'm wondering if that's the non-appearing harmony. That Sandra is describing.
I think we are standing in the sieve, in the middle point between the non-appearing harmony, the appearing one, as we've read together. The mind of the thinker is minding the point of the conversion between gold and things and gold.
I see my my individual self with the caring and trying to understand, but the reality that's really almost unimportant. The reality is this this I can't even grasp something to stay there, because the reality is that it's there always.
Picking up on always already finding oneself, somehow overpassing itself, looking, catching sight of the feeble words of the world, hearing the sound of what those words can't say, and finding oneself as already always being in and no thing. Already home.
Yeah. Nothing is truly ungraspable. It's always before us, and it will always outlast us. And yet we have this, what is in this book called, this native openness to this element. We can mind it, we can bear it, we can own it, we can acknowledge it. And in doing so, we soothe our own hearts and we renovate the world.
One heart at a time.
There's something about there's something strangely shocking about the nothing. And it is it's so strange. But and at the same time, its very strangeness is this familiarity at the heart of it. It brings to mind what Rilke in the Dueno eulogies spoke about, right? To see one's own words drift apart, to see to see the toy one lived with float away. And being dead is hard work and full of retrieval before one even tastes a trace of eternity. There's something about this in the moment that everything all the tied together meanings untie. That one somehow sees what one has always lived. And there's that shock, that weirdness. That is at the same time weird precisely in that it's an implicit.
It's one mirror reflecting another mirror there. One mirror reflecting. It's so close at hand and so obvious. One mirror reflects another. And nothing in the mirror, nothing. There's nothing in the mirror.
Except for that inconspicuous harmony.
I think now is the time to go into free dialogue.
Yes. Well, that was a ride.
Maybe dwelling in the silence. for a few moments.
This is the I'd have to say that this what he's talking about with the non-appearing harmony, like, and this kind of interplay of this withdrawing and its kindling, right? I think is the word that he used. That it's that thing that even I think it's 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 that thing that I think calls me to even read philosophy in the first place.
Yeah, it's where the weirdness of being throws us into an attunement where it's like it's never there because it's not a thing, but it's still there. And we hear
Yeah.
it. Our human heart is told of this force by homely gifts and hindered words. So we are always in this attunement, which for the Greeks, thaumazein, wonder, astoundment, is this like we are held off and we are drawn to it. We're in this simultaneous, like we're
Yeah.
we're a little bit thrown back, but we are drawn to it. And we are always in this because we can never grasp it, we can never have it, but we can mind it. So we always have to find the right stance.
Yeah.
I've been wondering why, after all the Buddhist practice and reading and study I've done, I've been drawn to this philosophy, to all these words, all these formats, notions, and I was not aware that the that it I had written to Daniel saying that I don't want to just talk about philosophy, talk about what people have written. I want to do practice, but I was not aware that this kind of practice could be so I I I don't know.
Well,
yeah, we all don't know. Now maybe giving a little. There's a video, you can also find it online on YouTube, where Heidegger talks to a Buddhist monk. And Heidegger says that he thinks that probably the decisive difference between the West and the East is that in the West, there's this emphasis on language, which Heidegger does not see in Buddhism. And also when I hear Buddhists, then it's more we end up in silence. And silence is where the greatest nearness to no-thingness is. While in the West, we always strive to save these inappearances, like art, poetry, as it's also said here. They do this also in the East. But I think Heidegger is right when he says that there has always been a great emphasis on language in the West.
This style, yeah. Yeah.
And that may be an explanation why you're drawn to this, Sandra.
Yeah.
And Buddhists do talk about liberation through the word.
Yeah, I know. But
yes, but what Yeah, I've not, I've been not, I've not practiced that sort of path myself until now.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's like where there's that sense where a word isn't what it's referring to.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's that is
yeah.
it's that
Okay.
isn't element that stays alive in the very existence of the word. It seems like you you can like in some sense you can hear,
Mhm.
right? And something like the tracings of that
Mhm.
of hearing that,
Mhm.
right, are these kind of forms within that can sound out, right, without exhausting it in some way.
And I think this
And
poem,
that's the apophatic tradition of the Western mystic.
yeah, and the poem points to that. The human heart is told, the ear of the heart opens to
Yeah, yeah,
the word. Yeah,
yeah,
I think that that really she pointed to something really profound there.
right. And then there's that element where ultimately all listening, if it hears deep enough, it hears silence. And
Mhm.
when it hears silence, it recognizes, right, that it's been dwelling in its very silence in order to hear it all, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Um,
Yeah. I
and
think
you can also hear here with the Greeks, kind of like this beginning, because a lot of these words like physis and logos and have been turned into representations at some point, right?
Yeah.
And in that we lost this kind of this contingency,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Element of it.
Mhm.
But you could also hear how it retained itself in not in the classic theism, right? Of not the theism that Heidegger kind of criticizes an ontotheology of, like, the ultimate God being the biggest being of all beings, right? Like, it's still an ontic sense to it,
Mhm.
but the classical ontological sense, right, of the one
Mhm.
God that isn't a being,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
You can kind of hear, like, in some sense, it's like all of this got started with with the Greeks,
Mhm.
right? That's the very beginnings of hearing that in
Mhm.
some sense.
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah. Yeah, Neoplatonism is certainly closer to what Heidegger criticizes than the ens summum, the highest being. And that was already there in the Middle Ages. And it's ens.
Yeah.
Ens is like ens is also this is an ens. And so their God is really the highest being. Uh, yeah, the word, right? I think Heidegger says somewhere the word is something like sheltering silence also. A true
Mm-hmm.
word, a discontingent word
Yeah.
is, you know,
Yeah.
gathering, sheltering,
Yeah.
the flagrancy of this contingent element of this
Right.
nothingness.
Right. It's kind of like, um what Eva was distinguishing out, right? This kind of difference between like basically a an apparent harmony, right? From a non-apparent harmony, right? Like was really interesting because I was thinking about like evidence of that, of the appearing harmony, right, makes possible um, something like a suburb or right or
Planned
like
communities. Yeah.
exactly
Yeah.
exactly like I went to, in fact it's funny, my dad was part of the zoning for this, but there was in Prescott Valley where I was a town close to where I graduated high school from, and I went back there, and they had, it was this little town, but they had literally implanted a whole old town, like an old town. They built an old town,
Oh,
right?
wow. Really? Wow.
Everything was, there was like everything was built in old style buildings, right?
Yeah.
Everything was made to look like
Yeah. A
that, and I was like,
simulacrum, and how terribly quaint.
yeah,
Right.
yeah. And
Yeah.
I thought about that when he talked about like, you know, how when you go, you try to recreate the harmony by like sounding out the exact, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Yeah.
minute, 2 seconds, first verse, you know,
Yeah.
1 minute, 22 seconds, second verse.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Like that it's like that mishearing or that misunderstanding or that that the I guess the downstream outcome of making these things a representation, right, on some level
Yeah.
is enacted, right, in the very like zoning choices that we make, right? Like it's like so this stuff is so close to us,
Yeah.
right? And we can
Yeah.
have no, and we can build these things and we can do all this stuff and we can, and like when we walk in them, it's like, you know, you can, it's like you can be asleep to it, or the moment you see it, you see its obvious banality, right? At the same
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Yeah. I have the same reaction when people say they want to go and walk in nature, so they have to remove remove themselves to okay, go through that gate and nature is there, nature is there, but nature is not here. Nature is there. And we've just lost so much with all our blocking off and like we've lost everything.
Yeah.
I think Evo's book, or he there's a poem by Emily Dickinson that Evo has quoted somewhere that goes something like, "Today I lost the world."
Oh.
uh,
In
that's
the
a very
weirdness?
hmm?
Yeah, I don't have it here. I don't have weirdness right here.
It might be
In the
there.
weirdness of being,
I'm not
that book?
I'm not sure where it was.
Yeah.
I would have to find it. Yeah, I've been very nihilistic again in the last couple of days, just because why are people so oblivious to being?
Yeah.
The forsakenness of beings by
Yeah.
being, it's so exhausting and so
Yeah.
and so ugly and
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
why is
That's
nobody waking up?
I have you been doing statistics, Daniel?
No,
Oh,
I've had to learn for shitty exams,
yeah.
but I shouldn't say this here.
Yeah.
We'll hear
um,
you.
um, no, it's yeah. I can't even watch YouTube these days. I open it and think to myself, "Oh my God, what has become of humanity?" Like,
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I'm
I've
just,
Yeah.
been
I'm
doing an
just,
awful lot of gardening.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Totally.
An
I did
awful
like
lot.
the last 2 days. I did two strolls, not just one, like two strolls, and I'm just alone with my books. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
You know, I was I just got back, I think last week. I think it was last week. I went to go teach at a retreat in Montana.
Oh, right.
And
Yeah, I remember.
in
Yeah,
in
you
in,
told us.
in like and it's a ranch right by Livingston, I think Livingston, Montana, which is right in the middle of Yellowstone. And it is the landscape there is just ridiculously beautiful. I mean, it's like it's so beautiful. It almost hurts.
Mm.
Like so stunning. You know, there's like no people there, not many people in Montana,
Yeah.
and like it's these flat kind of prairie
Mm.
um, ranches, right, that are just spread out. So they have this vast kind of distance in one level, this kind of plain that go jet straight up into these mountains that are like go straight basically up,
Wow.
and
Wow.
all these ecosystems and stuff like that. And I was out there sitting, kind of sitting on a little like a little hill, and they were doing some kind of talk, below me. And I looked behind me, and there were just this like small little groupings of trees right in the middle of this prairie with these like levels and layers of horizons that just went back forever. These mountains, it's funny. I swear to God, I felt like I heard this harmony, like,
Mm.
and I could hear in the distance, like the people talking, right? Kind of oblivious to this harmony,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Still kind of pouring forth. And
Mm.
it's funny because I thought it struck me a lot about, I think that this is what Goethe was trying to get at
Mm.
in his sciences, right? Like, because he had this whole science, this botany, right, where he's trying to he's trying to be able to see or to hear or to behold the phenomena, the
It's Urphänomen, the primordial original
Yeah,
phenomenon.
the word
yeah.
harmony, yeah.
And it's something similar. I think it's Steiner that kind of puts it in this language where it's like where it's, if you really appreciate what he's trying to do, right? Because it's like it's like if you get, if you kind of get at this, you look at it from the standpoint of when we look at a man-made object, right? When we see a bed or a couch or a cup or whatever, like we don't see it as a clump of stuff, right? We read it, right? So like
Mm.
the shape of the thing is something like analogous to the shapes of a letter, and
Mhm.
we read out these man-made objects because we understand or grasp the
Yeah,
idea, right?
yeah,
Um, but when we look at nature, we
yeah.
don't know how to read nature,
Mhm.
right? So what we do is we
Yeah.
try to understand nature by measuring the shapes of the letters,
Mhm.
right? Which is reading. And so Goethe was kind of onto this, where he was like, is it possible, right, that I can read nature as similar to the way that I read something like a man-made object? But because we don't understand or know, right, the ideal element in nature, right? He was like he's trying to get at being able to intuit or learn how to read nature as like a sacred text of some kind.
Mhm.
And had this moment. I just had this kind of this felt sense of like, oh yeah, I think I just can taste just the very beginnings of what he's talking about there,
Mhm.
right?
That
Mhm.
was that's kind of what German idealism was about. How is nature and spirit? How do they interconnect?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
Goethean science is interesting because for him the body was so important. Like you don't just, you know, scientists today doesn't really matter, right? The subject is taken out of the
Yeah.
equation. But for Goethe,
mm,
like the body as like an instrument with which we, you know, observe things and behold them and mind them and so on. That was really, really crucial.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's this sentence also, don't look for anything behind the phenomena. The phenomena themselves are the teacher. That's a
Yeah. Yeah.
Was that
Yeah.
from him?
Yeah, that was from
Yeah.
Goethe. Heidegger sometimes quoted that sentence.
You can hear that, bringing that back into like today's reading. It's kind of like you can hear that sense where he's talking about like that. Well, how does the non-apparent show itself in the apparent, right? This kind of flagrancy.
Yeah.
Right? This shining forth yet withdrawing at the same time. It's like it winks at you or something.
Yeah. Always. Always.
Yeah.
Yeah. Always.
And so it's this strange way where it's like because I'm watching this with Teague, my 21 month, right? Like it's so mysterious to me. It's like he's somehow there's something about his neuropsychological semantic constitution, right? That can somehow fucking recognized what a word was and to pay attention to it, right? Like, and I mean, you can hear John V's relevance realization here, right? And in numbers, and he's got this unusually early sense for it.
Yeah.
But there's something about it, like just certain words and numbers and letters kind of catch his attention, and he does this merging thing with them, where he'll somehow sound it out until it the gestalt of its meaning becomes present. You can hear him practicing it, but this kind of thing is in some way he's similar to these numbers and letters. There's something mimicking and merging, and the drawing element of that, right, are in these kind of logos. This logos.
I wanted to when I had the word Gestalt in my head, you just said it, basically. We talked about Gestalt at my university just a few days ago, and this is really, it's almost like the Platonic, the idoi, right? We have this capacity to intuitively, all of us intuitively recognize, realize, behold, kind of this form that supersedes all the parts of something. We have a capacity to mind the whole, the gestalt of a thing. Right? Even in English, if I would say, like, I don't know, if I would throw in words that don't make sense, you would all be irritated. And it's like, what's going on? Or if I don't know, this book, something's with this book is like, I don't know, cut through here and it doesn't look like a book, you would all be irritated.
Yeah.
And you can do this with almost everything. So how when the gestalt is broken, how we had this example, right? You have like, let's say this is a circle that's imperfect, but we just complement it.
Yeah.
Or we can, I could write a sentence that's like not correct. Like, for example, I replace words.
Oh yeah,
And then you can still read the sentence coherently. And there are all these things from Gestalt
with actually very few correct letters.
Yeah. These are all these things from Gestalt psychology, but I think it's really interesting.
So it's really interesting. Right now, I'm in the middle of shooting all the videos for a course that's going to be like a downloadable course online, which is all about getting, right? Basically getting another's world. right? So it's talking about kind of all these forms of deep listening. And 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 it's so interesting that you bring this up, because I'm like, oh yeah, this one video where I'm trying to distinguish context, right? Of like, it's the context, right, that gives the meaning of the thing in the foreground. That
Absolutely, yeah.
you get
Yeah,
something,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
The experience of getting that, oh, is where you go from that, like these elements of like despairing discontingencies or contingencies, right? That like don't go together. And so like I'm starting this one with like where I just draw like an oval, and then I write out, say there's two context words, right? That all of these, and I don't give the context yet. This is how we open up. I don't give what the context is, and I just have all the different words that mean red and mean blue, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then just have you try to find the through line. And what's interesting is that in your irritation, you have to try to find the through line. You have to make, there's this kind of element where we are so that kind of being, that if we don't see it, we're going to look for it, right? And then at some point I'll give them the two word, or I'll draw a line in between all the red words and all the blue words and see if they get it, right? And then at some moment kind of give them the context words, right? And then you go, once you get the context words, then you draw another line above that and say, what is the context of that context? And then, but instead I'll draw the third line up, and I'll distinguish, right, the meta context, so they can get the context, and like you can get this, right? But that whole, yeah, we're doing that all the time.
Yeah.
Right?
All the time. Yeah.
I have to go.
And
so
okay.
Sorry. It's late here. The practice was wonderful today.
That was really great today.
Yeah, it was really amazing. You know, I think the poetry did it, eh?
Yeah.
I think, yeah, we'll have to read more poetry.
Yeah, totally. All right, much love. Bye-bye.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.